Jake Miller's boots echoed through the silent corridors of the dead alien warship, each step sending metallic clangs into the darkness that seemed to go on forever. The vessel had been drifting through space for 300 years, a massive ghost from the Valorian Empire's golden age. Back when they ruled half the galaxy and everyone else just tried to stay out of their way. Most salvagers wouldn't touch these wrecks. Too creepy, they said. Too cursed. Too unprofitable because Valorian tech was so advanced that humans couldn't figure out how to use most of it anyway. Jake had heard all the stories. Ships that drove crews insane. Technology that exploded when you touched it wrong. Salvagers who went in and never came back out. But Jake needed the money. His ship needed repairs. His fuel tanks were nearly empty. And the rent on his docking bay was 3 months overdue. Fear had never stopped a human before, and it sure wasn't going to stop him now. His handheld scanner beeped steadily as he moved deeper into the ship's lower decks. The air was stale and cold, recycled through his suit. His headlamp cut through the darkness, revealing chambers filled with strange crystallized remains and technology that looked more like art than machinery. Valorians had built things that humanity still couldn't understand, even after studying their stuff for decades. Sometimes Jake wondered if humans would ever catch up, or if they'd always be the new kids in the galaxy, fumbling around with things they barely understood. The scanner led him through a maze of corridors. Past what looked like living quarters. Past enormous engine rooms with machinery that hummed with residual power even after centuries. Past armories filled with weapons that still glowed faintly, waiting for hands that would never return. Then he found the nursery. The room was vast and circular, with a domed ceiling that must have once shown the stars. Now it was just black. Rows and rows of pods stretched into the darkness, all of them dark and empty. Jake's light swept across them, counting dozens, maybe hundreds. This must have been where they kept their young during long voyages. All except one pod. Right in the center of the room. Its display was still lit, casting a soft blue glow. Jake's scanner went crazy, beeping faster. Biosignature detected. Life signs present. But weak. Very weak. Dying. Jake's heart pounded as he approached. He'd been salvaging for 8 years and he'd never found anything alive on a derelict. Never. Most ships had been dead for centuries, their crews long gone, nothing left but bones and memories. He reached the pod and looked inside. His breath caught in his throat. A small creature lay there, no bigger than a human newborn baby. Maybe even smaller. It had shimmering purple scales that caught the light like jewels. 4 delicate limbs, thin and fragile looking. But they were twisted at wrong angles, bent in ways that made Jake wince just looking at them. The creature looked broken, like someone had crumpled it up and tried to smooth it back out. Then its eyes opened. They were large and dark, taking up most of its small face. Intelligent eyes. Aware eyes. Eyes that looked right at Jake with an expression he recognized, even across the gap between species. Fear. Pain. Loneliness. But also something else. Maybe hope. Maybe just desperation. The pod's display flickered, text scrolling across it in the flowing script of the Valorian language. Jake fumbled with his translator, holding it up to the screen. The device hummed and beeped, processing. Then words appeared on his own display in plain English. Subject, Hatchling 847K. Status, genetic defect detected. Motor function assessment, 0%. Neural pathways, damaged beyond repair. Prognosis, terminal within 7 solar cycles. Action taken, abandoned per tradition. May the ancestors grant swift passage to the eternal dark. Jake read it twice, then a third time. His stomach twisted. They'd left it here. Left this baby here to die alone in the dark. On purpose. Because it was born wrong. Because it couldn't move. Because their tradition said that was the right thing to do. Every instinct Jake had screamed at him to walk away. This wasn't his problem. This wasn't even his species. Interfering with alien customs was illegal. The Galactic Council had rules about this stuff, and those rules were serious. People got thrown in prison for less. The creature was paralyzed. Dying. The pod said it was impossible to save. What was he supposed to do? He wasn't a doctor. He was a salvager. A mechanic who pulled valuable junk out of dead ships. He didn't know anything about alien biology or medicine. Jake stared at those eyes. Those big, aware, terrified eyes. The hatchling looked back at him. It couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything except look at him with an expression that crossed every boundary between species. Please. That's what those eyes said. Please don't leave me here alone. Jake thought about his own species. About how humans had clawed their way up from caves to spaceships. About how they'd always been the ones who looked at impossible situations and said, "Yeah, but what if we try anyway?" About how every other species in the galaxy thought humans were crazy because they refused to accept the word impossible. "Ah, hell," Jake muttered, reaching for the pod release mechanism. His fingers found the controls, human hands working with alien technology. "Humans are terrible at minding our own business anyway." The pod hissed open. Cold air rushed out, carrying a scent like ozone and something floral. Jake carefully slid his hands under the small form, supporting its twisted body as gently as he could. It weighed almost nothing. Light as air. Fragile as glass. The hatchling made a soft chirping sound. High-pitched and musical. Fear or hope, Jake couldn't tell which. Maybe both. "Easy there, little one," Jake whispered, cradling it against his chest as he turned back toward the corridor. "Let's see what us stubborn humans can figure out. Nobody said we were smart, but we're too dumb to quit." Behind him, the dead ship continued its eternal drift through the void, tumbling slowly through the darkness between stars. One less ghost haunted its halls now. One less soul left to die alone. And somewhere ahead, in the galaxy that had called this situation impossible, a human mechanic carried hope in his arms. 3 weeks had passed since Jake had committed what the Galactic Council called cultural interference, and what he called basic decency. 3 weeks of sleepless nights, constant worry, and making things up as he went along. The hatchling was still alive, which surprised everyone. Other salvagers said she'd be dead in days. The few doctors Jake had contacted said bringing her aboard was pointless. Even Jake himself had moments where he wondered if he was just delaying the inevitable. But she was still here. Still breathing. Still looking at him with those intelligent eyes. He'd named her Spark because of the way her scales glowed when she was alert. They'd shimmer and brighten, shifting from deep purple to almost violet when she was paying attention to something. It reminded Jake of electricity running through circuits. Spark seemed fitting for a little fighter who refused to give up. His small freighter, the Long Shot, had become an improvised hospital that would probably get him arrested if any medical inspector ever saw it. The cargo bay was now filled with equipment that had no business being together. Valorian life support pods connected to human medical monitors with about 40 different adapter cables. Nutrient feeds running through pumps designed for completely different purposes. Temperature controls jury-rigged from 3 separate systems because Valorian biology needed different conditions than the ship normally provided. Jake had torn apart half his ship to keep Spark alive. He'd pulled the spare environmental processor from storage and modified it. He'd rewired the medical bay's power supply twice. He'd even sacrificed his emergency backup generator to make sure nothing would fail if the main power hiccuped. The whole setup would give any proper xenobiologist a heart attack. It broke about 17 safety protocols and probably violated a dozen galactic health codes. But it worked. Somehow, impossibly, it worked. Spark couldn't move anything below her neck. Her 4 limbs lay still and twisted. She couldn't feed herself, couldn't adjust her position, couldn't do any of the basic things that living creatures take for granted. But her mind was sharp. Jake could see it in her eyes. She watched everything he did with intense focus, tracking his movements around the cargo bay, observing how he adjusted equipment and mixed her nutrient solutions. Jake had spent days figuring out how to communicate with her. The translator could handle Valorian language, but Spark couldn't speak. Couldn't make the sounds. So Jake dug into his software library and found old eye-tracking programs designed for paralyzed human patients. Technology developed decades ago for people who could only move their eyes. He'd mounted a small screen near Spark's pod with a camera focused on her face. The software tracked where she looked, letting her select letters and words by staring at them. It was slow and clumsy at first. Jake had to calibrate it about 50 times. But eventually they got it working. Their first real conversation happened on day 9. Jake was checking her vital signs when words appeared on the monitor. "You shouldn't have saved me." Jake stopped what he was doing. His hands froze over the control panel. He turned to look at Spark and her eyes were locked on him. "Yeah, well, I do a lot of things I shouldn't," Jake replied, trying to keep his voice light. He adjusted her nutrient feed, checking the flow rate. "If I only did smart things, I'd be a lot richer and a lot more bored." Why? Such a simple question. Such a complicated answer. Jake pulled up a crate and sat down next to her pod. He was quiet for a moment, really thinking about it. "Because every life matters," he finally said. "That's human philosophy 101. We've got this thing where we believe everyone deserves a chance. Doesn't matter if you're born different or damaged or the universe dealt you a bad hand. You still matter." Spark's eyes moved across the screen, slowly spelling out her response. The Valorians say defective young weaken the clutch. That sacrificing the broken ones makes the group stronger. The Valorians, Jake said firmly, meeting her gaze, are wrong. He'd been thinking about that a lot over the past 3 weeks. About how different species had different values. The Valorians had survived for thousands of years with their traditions. Who was he to judge? But then he'd look at Spark, at this brilliant mind trapped in a body that wouldn't work, and he knew. Some traditions were just wrong. Period. Jake had been studying her condition obsessively. Every spare moment he was reading. Medical databases. Valorian biology texts. Human neurology. Anything that might help him understand what was happening inside her small body. His tablet was filled with notes and diagrams. His search history would confuse any algorithm. The Valorians had classified her paralysis as a genetic defect. Permanent. Untreatable. Hopeless. Their medical scans said her neural pathways were damaged beyond repair. End of story. They'd made their judgment and left her to die based on that diagnosis. But something bothered Jake about it. He couldn't put his finger on it at first. Just a feeling that something was off. The Valorians were advanced. Their medicine was centuries ahead of human technology. So why did their diagnosis feel incomplete? Then he had an idea. A stupid, probably useless idea. But Jake had built a career on stupid ideas that occasionally worked. He had a portable MRI unit in storage. Basic human medical technology. Nothing fancy. The kind of scanner that human doctors had been using for decades. Primitive compared to Valorian diagnostic tools. Jake set it up and ran Spark through it. He didn't expect to find anything the advanced Valorian scanners had missed. He was just being thorough. Checking every angle. The results made him stop breathing. There, along her neural pathways, were crystallized deposits. Tiny formations blocking the nerve channels. Not genetic damage. Not permanent defects. Blockages. Like kidney stones, but in her nervous system. Physical obstructions that were stopping signals from getting through. The Valorian scanners had been calibrated to look for genetic markers. They'd seen the paralysis, assumed genetic cause, and stopped looking. They'd never checked for physical blockages because that wasn't what they expected to find. Jake's heart pounded. He ran the scan again. Same results. A third time. Still there. Those crystallized deposits, clear as day on the human scanner. Spark, he said slowly, his voice shaking. I think we can fix this. Her eyes went wide. Her scales brightened, shifting through colors Jake had never seen before. The emotion was clear even across species. Hope. Pure, desperate hope. Impossible, her screen read. Jake grinned, that reckless smile that had gotten him in trouble his whole life. Impossible is just another Tuesday for humans. 6 months of hell began that day. Jake sold everything he didn't absolutely need. His spare parts collection that he'd spent years building went first. Then his salvage rights to 3 promising wreck sites he'd been planning to explore. His backup hyperdrive, the one he swore he'd never part with because you never knew when you'd need it. Gone. Sold to the highest bidder. He traded favors with people he barely knew. Called in debts from old friends. Begged colleagues for equipment loans and medical supplies. Some help. Most thought he was crazy. A few told him directly that he was wasting his time and money on a lost cause. Jake maxed out every credit line he had. His bank account hit 0, then went negative. Collection agencies started calling. He ignored them. What were they going to do, repossess his ship? They'd have to catch him first. His cargo bay transformed into something that looked like mad science and engineering had a baby, and that baby had serious issues. Medical equipment hung from the ceiling on improvised mounting brackets. Wires ran everywhere, taped down with whatever Jake could find. Chemical processors hummed next to engine parts. Human medical monitors beeped alongside Valorian regeneration pods. The whole setup violated every safety regulation ever written. Probably some that hadn't been written yet. The treatment itself was brutal. Jake had pieced together a plan from human medical journals and Valorian data fragments. Human chelation therapy to break down the crystalline deposits, mixed with Valorian cellular regeneration techniques to repair the damaged nerves. 2 completely different medical philosophies that had never been combined before. No one had ever attempted anything like it because everyone assumed it couldn't work. The Galactic Medical Council sent legal threats within the first week. Official notices telling Jake to cease all medical procedures immediately. That he wasn't qualified. That he was endangering an alien life form. That he would face criminal charges. Jake deleted the messages without reading past the first paragraph. Other Valorians were worse. They sent angry transmissions calling him a barbarian. A primitive human interfering with sacred traditions, corrupting their ways with his crude medicine. They demanded he return Spark to them so she could die with dignity as their ancestors intended. Jake's response to that was short and included several words that probably shouldn't be translated. His salvager friends thought he'd completely lost his mind. They'd stop by the long shot and see what he was doing and just shake their heads. One of them, an old guy named Rick who'd been salvaging for 30 years, actually tried to stage an intervention. "You're throwing your life away for that thing," Rick had said. Jake had asked him to leave. They hadn't spoken since. But Jake ignored them all. Every voice telling him to stop. Every logical reason to quit. Every piece of evidence that said this wouldn't work. He ignored it and kept going because that's what humans did when they decided something mattered. Before the first treatment session, Jake stood over Spark's pod with his hand hovering over the activation switch. His hand was shaking. He'd run simulations 100 times, checked every calculation, reviewed every procedure. But this was real now. This could kill her if he got it wrong. "This is going to hurt," Jake told her honestly. "The process of breaking down those deposits, the regeneration therapy. I won't lie to you. It's going to be painful." Spark's eyes moved across her screen. "Pain means I'm alive. Begin." Jake took a breath and pressed the switch. The first month was pure agony. Spark's small body convulsed as the treatments ran through her system. Human chemicals breaking down alien crystalline structures. Valorian cellular regeneration fighting to repair nerves that had been dormant since birth. Her scales would lose color then flash too bright. Her breathing would become rapid and shallow. Jake barely slept. He lived in the cargo bay, monitoring every vital sign on his wall of mismatched displays. When something went wrong, which happened constantly, he'd adjust protocols on the fly. Adding more of this chemical. Reducing that regeneration cycle. Modifying power levels. He was making it up as he went, treating each crisis as it came. There were nights when he thought he'd killed her. When her vitals dropped and alarms screamed and Jake worked frantically to stabilize her. Nights when he seriously considered stopping because watching her suffer was torture. But Spark never quit. Every morning, her eyes would open and look at him with determination that made Jake's chest ache. Then, in week 7, something incredible happened. Jake was running a routine check when he saw it. Spark's left foreclaw twitched. Just a tiny movement. He thought he'd imagined it. Stress and sleep deprivation playing tricks on him. But then it happened again. Deliberate. Controlled. Her foreclaw moved, flexed, then relaxed. "Did you just?" Jake's voice broke. He couldn't finish the sentence. Words appeared on Spark's screen. "I moved it." Then several exclamation marks. She'd learned those from human text messages. They meant excitement, joy, triumph. Jake sat down hard on a cargo crate, suddenly unable to stand. His vision went blurry. He definitely wasn't crying. That was just coolant leak. Or dust. Or something. Progress came slowly after that moment. Agonizingly slow. A twitch became a tremor over days. A tremor became actual movement over weeks. Each tiny improvement felt like a miracle. Jake introduced Spark to human physical therapy. Exercises that human doctors had developed for stubborn patients who refused to accept paralysis. Resistance training with tiny weights. Range of motion exercises. Coordination drills. All adapted for Valorian biology through trial and error. Spark's determination matched his own. She worked through pain that would have stopped most beings. Where Valorian tradition said accept your limits and die with grace, human philosophy said break your limits and live anyway. By month 5, Spark could manipulate small tools. She started helping Jake with repairs, her foreclaws working with increasing coordination. She'd hand him wrenches, hold components steady, even do some of the detailed soldering that Jake's bigger human hands struggled with. By month 6, she took her first unassisted steps. Jake had cleared space in the cargo bay, patted the floor with foam mats. Spark stood on shaky legs, wobbled, and took one step forward. Then another. Then 3 more before she needed to rest. The impossible had become reality. And somewhere in the galaxy, every medical textbook was suddenly wrong. The long shot limped into Nexus Station running on fumes and prayers. Jake had pushed the engines past their limits for the final jump, and the ship was making noises that no ship should ever make. Warning lights covered his console like a bad rash. The fuel gauge had been sitting at 0 for the last hour. By all rights, they should have been stranded in deep space. But they'd made it. Somehow. Jake had never been happier in his life. Spark insisted on walking off the ship herself. Jake had offered to carry her or bring a hover platform. She'd refused with a look that reminded him exactly how stubborn she'd become over the past 6 months. Probably learned that from him. Her gait was unsteady, that was true. She wobbled a bit on the boarding ramp. Her 4 legs didn't quite move in perfect coordination yet. But it was walking. Real, actual, impossible walking. The docking bay had the usual chaos. Ships coming and going. Dock workers moving cargo. Station security doing their patrols. Normal day at one of the galaxy's busiest stations. Then someone saw Spark walking down the ramp. The docking bay fell silent. It started with one dock worker who dropped the crate he was carrying. Then his supervisor stopped mid-sentence. A Valorian merchant nearby made a choking sound. Within seconds, every eye in the bay was locked on the small figure carefully making her way down the ramp with Jake walking nervously beside her. Jake heard someone whisper, "That's impossible." Yeah, he thought. That was the whole point. Word spread like wildfire through the station. Within an hour, the docking bay was packed with people. Within 2 hours, the station administrator was demanding an emergency meeting. Within 3 hours, the news had hit the galactic networks and every major media outlet was trying to get to Nexus Station. The station descended into chaos. Valorian officials arrived first. The same ones who had sent Jake messages ordering him to return the defective hatchling, so she could die properly. They stood there now, faces showing expressions that Jake had learned meant shock and confusion in their species. They'd been so certain. Their medical scans had been definitive. This wasn't supposed to be possible. They were looking at living proof of their mistake, and they didn't know what to do with it. Xenobiologists swarmed next. Scientists from a dozen different species, all demanding to know how a human salvager with zero formal medical training had accomplished what the galaxy's best doctors had declared impossible. They wanted samples. Scans. Data. Detailed records of every procedure. Jake told them they could wait in line like everyone else. The Galactic Medical Council sent representatives. Official-looking types in official-looking uniforms with official-looking documents. They tried to seize Jake's research. Claimed it was dangerous, unregulated medical experimentation. That all data had to be surrendered immediately for proper review. Jake told them exactly where they could file their paperwork. His exact words couldn't be broadcast on most networks, but they got the point. Station security tried to restore order but gave up pretty quickly. This was beyond crowd control. This was history happening and everyone wanted to be part of it. The real firestorm started when Spark decided to address the assembled crowd. The station administrator offered the main hall. Thousands packed in. More watched through screens. The whole galaxy was watching. Spark stood at the podium, still a bit wobbly but standing on her own 4 legs. Her translator was hooked up to the station's audio system. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the hall. "I was abandoned to die," she began. Simple words. Direct. Honest. Not because I was beyond help. Not because no treatment existed. I was left alone in the dark because my people never thought to question tradition. The Valorians in the audience shifted uncomfortably. "We never imagined that different approaches might succeed where ours failed," Spark continued. "We had our ways. Our methods. Our medical technology that everyone said was centuries ahead of human medicine. And because we were so advanced, we never considered that sometimes the answer might come from looking at problems differently." She gestured toward Jake, who was trying very hard to blend into the background and failing. "This human didn't save me because it was logical. It wasn't. He bankrupted himself buying equipment he barely knew how to use. He risked criminal charges. He ignored everyone who told him it was impossible." Jake felt thousands of eyes turn toward him. He wished the floor would open up and swallow him. "He didn't save me because it was profitable," Spark said. "He'll probably spend years paying off the debt. He didn't save me because it was safe. He combined medical techniques that were never meant to be combined and any mistake could have killed me." Her scales brightened, that shimmer that Jake now knew meant strong emotion. "He saved me because he looked at impossible and decided to try anyway. That is the human gift to the galaxy. They refuse to accept that anything is truly hopeless. Where we see the end, they see a challenge." A Valorian elder stood up slowly. His scales had darkened to almost black, which Jake had learned was a sign of deep shame in their culture. "How many others?" the elder asked quietly. His voice shook. "How many hatchlings did we abandon who could have been saved?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Like a weight pressing down on everyone present. Spark's response was gentle but firm. "Dozens each cycle. Perhaps hundreds over the generations. I cannot give you exact numbers. But we can change that. If we're willing to learn." If we're willing to question tradition when tradition causes suffering. The hall erupted. Arguments broke out. Some Valorians defended their traditions. Others demanded immediate reform. Scientists argued about medical protocols. Philosophers debated ethics. The whole thing dissolved into chaos in about 30 seconds. The controversy exploded across the galactic networks within minutes. News feeds couldn't get enough of it. Valorian society fractured between traditionalists who insisted their ways had worked for millennia and reformers who demanded immediate change. The medical council faced demands to investigate cross-species treatment approaches. Politicians got involved. Religious leaders got involved. Everyone had an opinion. Jake tried to slip away in the chaos. He'd had enough attention to last him several lifetimes. Spark caught him halfway to the exit. "Where are you going?" "Away from all this attention," Jake muttered, pulling his jacket hood up. "I'm a salvager, not a revolutionary. I just wanted to help one person. Not start a galactic incident." Spark's eyes gleamed with mischief. She'd definitely learned from him. "Too late. We have work to do." 4 years later, the long shot didn't look like the same ship anymore. Jake had upgraded it piece by piece, funding each improvement with donations from grateful families and grants from research institutions who wanted to study his work. The vessel had transformed into something between a medical ship and a salvage vessel, somehow both and neither. The exterior still looked rough. Mismatched hull plates from a dozen different ships. Scorch marks from that incident near the Corellius Nebula that Jake refused to talk about. But inside it was something special. A fully equipped medical bay sat next to a workshop full of tools. Diagnostic equipment shared space with welding rigs. It was organized chaos that somehow worked perfectly. The crew had grown too. What started as one stubborn human and one determined Valorian had become a family of 12 specialists from 6 different species. There was Krell, a Mantarian engineer who'd heard about Jake's work and showed up one day asking to help. Beth, a human doctor who'd gotten fed up with hospital bureaucracy and wanted to actually make a difference. Torres, a Zillion chemist who specialized in cross-species pharmacology. Each one had their own story of why they joined. Most of them had been told something was impossible and refused to accept it. They were Jake's kind of people. Spark had grown up. She stood nearly as tall as Jake now, her purple scales having darkened and strengthened with maturity. She moved with complete confidence, no trace remaining of that wobbling hatchling from years ago. She'd become one of the galaxy's leading experts in what the medical community called impossible cases, though Spark hated that term. "Nothing is impossible," she'd say. "Just unexplored." Her unique perspective, blending human stubbornness with Valorian precision, had saved 93 lives so far. Jake kept count on a wall in the galley. 93 beings who'd been declared hopeless by conventional medicine. 93 families who'd gotten their loved ones back. Each one represented months of work, endless experiments, and usually at least one breakthrough that made the medical journals rewrite their textbooks. Jake still claimed he was just a mechanic whenever reporters tried to interview him. He'd deflect praise and change the subject. But medical facilities across the galaxy were using equipment he'd designed. His hybrid diagnostic tools, cobbled together from human and alien technology, had revolutionized cross-species medicine. Major hospitals had entire departments dedicated to the approaches he'd pioneered in his cargo bay. Universities wanted to give him honorary degrees. He turned them all down. Awards ceremonies sent invitations. He ignored them. Jake didn't do this for recognition. He did it because people needed help and he was too stubborn to say no. Today they were responding to a distress beacon from the outer rim. The signal had been broadcasting for 3 weeks. Another impossible case, according to the medical experts. A young Rigelian named Vex whose neural disorder was declared incurable by every specialist his parents had consulted. "The medical experts have given up," Spark noted, reviewing the case file on her tablet. Her foreclaw scrolled through pages of test results and failed treatment attempts. "They've tried every conventional approach. Nothing worked." Jake snorted, making adjustments to their course through the navigation console. "Experts give up. Humans don't. That's kind of our whole thing." "I was declared hopeless too," Spark said softly, looking up from the tablet. "And look at you now," Jake said with a grin. "Bossing around a whole medical crew and making me feel guilty every time I think about sleeping." Spark's scales shimmered with amusement. That color shift Jake had learned meant she was laughing. "Someone has to keep you from killing yourself with overwork. If I left it up to you, you'd work 30-hour days." "That's rich coming from you," Jake shot back. "I saw you in the med bay at 3 in the morning last week." That was different. I was finishing important research. Ah. And what I do isn't important. Their easy banter was interrupted by an incoming transmission alert. Jake pulled it up on screen. Official seal of the Valorian homeworld. That was unusual. They didn't hear from the Valorian government much these days. The message was from the Council of Elders. They wanted to formally apologize for their treatment of Spark and announce the establishment of new screening protocols for all hatchlings. Every young Valorian would now be screened using hybrid diagnostic approaches combining traditional Valorian scans with human medical imaging. No more would they rely on a single method. They'd also established the Spark Initiative, a program to review cases of all hatchlings abandoned over the past 50 years to determine how many might have been treatable. They're finally learning, Spark said, reading the message. Her voice carried weight. Pride. Sadness for those who died unnecessarily. Hope for those who might now be saved. Took them long enough, Jake replied. But that's the thing about good ideas. Eventually, even the stubborn ones catch on. Change happens slow, but it happens. The long shot dropped out of hyperspace near the distress beacon coordinates. A small transport waited there, barely keeping life support running. Through the view screen, Jake could see faces pressed against the windows. Desperate parents who'd spent everything they had chasing one last hope. Jake grabbed his medical kit from the storage locker. The worn bag contained an odd combination of human tools and alien technology that shouldn't work together but somehow did. Syringes next to cellular regenerators. A standard stethoscope beside a quantum neural scanner. Each item had a story, usually involving Jake figuring things out the hard way. Ready? Spark asked, standing by the airlock. Her medical team was already assembled behind her, each checking their equipment. When am I not? Jake said, slinging the bag over his shoulder. They walked toward the airlock together, the paralyzed hatchling who shouldn't have survived and the salvager who refused to let her die, heading toward another impossible miracle. Behind them, a crew that believed in second chances. Ahead of them, a family holding on to their last shred of hope. Because that's what humans did. They carried the broken and the hopeless into the light, too stubborn to accept that impossible meant forever. They looked at darkness and brought their own light. They heard "can't be done," and heard a challenge instead of a conclusion. And sometimes, just sometimes, the galaxy became a little bit better because one person decided that impossible was just another problem waiting to be solved. One stubborn human who refused to walk away from someone who needed help. The airlock cycled open, and Jake stepped forward to meet another family who'd been told to give up. He had no intention of letting them down.